Coming up, what an excellent day for an exorcism. Well, howdy folks, and welcome to Minute 91 of the Exorcist Minute, a show where we endeavor to examine, extrapolate, and excavate The Exorcist, minute by terrifying minute. My name is Lester Ryan Clark.
And I'm Keenan Diaz.
And I'm Father David Mowry.
And we'll be your holy guides on this journey through what some have called the scariest movie of all time. And yes, folks, that voice you heard was Father David Mowry. Yes, folks, it's getting a little spooky here, so we decided to bring in a priest. We went right to it, folks. We didn't even get any doctors on the show. Father David Mowry, it is so wonderful to have you here with us. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us a little bit, just give the listeners a little bit of an intro to yourself.
Well, sure, I'd be happy to. First and foremost, thanks so much for having me on the show. I suppose I'll start with the podcast version of my introduction. I am something of a professional podcast guest. I style myself as the chaplain to the Movies by Minutes community. So all these wonderful shows that go through films 1 minute at a time. I've been a guest on a whole slew of them. I was counting the other day, and I got up to around 24, 25 of those shows, including like multiple seasons, because Marvel Movie Minute, they get a lot of shows out of just their one show title. But it's been something I've been doing now for, I'd say about 4 years, 5 years.
My goodness.
Ever since the Indiana Jones Minute fellas had me on for Last Crusade Minute. It's been something I've really enjoyed doing. As a priest, I've been a priest for 10 years. I'm a priest of the Diocese of Joliet, which is just southwest of the city of Chicago. So it's suburban Chicago and then down into the more rural parts of the kind of northern part of Illinois. I've served as a parish priest for the first 5 years of my priesthood in some big suburban parishes in the Chicagoland area. And for the last 5 years, I've been the professor of homiletics at the University of St. Mary of the Lake Mundelein Seminary, which is the school that trains priests for about 30 different dioceses across the United States.
Wow. That is so wonderful. And we are folks, we had to get him on this show. Already a professional podcasting priest, say that 3 times fast, guys. Professional podcasting priest, right?
Right. We wanted Father David on. Well, he was one of the first guests that we reached out to, actually. And then we had to find the right time. He told us certain minutes he didn't want to be on, and we were lucky for that.
Yes.
Look, I just don't do well with needles, and I don't do well with blood. So I would have been a poor guest for any of those
most
minutes.
Of this movie
most
is out.
Of the movie.
Yeah, no kidding.
But this is so great. Father David, could you tell us a little bit about your relationship with this movie?
The Exorcist is a movie that I think a lot about because it is a movie I was introduced to while I was still in seminary. So for those listeners who aren't familiar, in preparation to become a Catholic priest, a pretty typical path is that a young man will enter into 8 years of study for seminary, roughly broken up into 4 years of college studies in philosophy, and then 4 years of graduate level studies in theology. So when I was in college seminary up in the Twin Cities, a bunch of seminarians were kind of kicking around the idea, like, let's move. It's a Friday night. What do you want to do? And someone said, hey, let's watch The Exorcist. Okay, as you do at a Catholic seminary.
Of course.
Sure. So that was, I was either in my first or second year of seminary. So I was only 19, maybe 20 years old.
Okay.
And had not watched any horror movies growing up.
Whoa.
Yeah, my just a slight detour. My uncle had gotten me a copy of Jurassic Park on VHS. Remember that when it first came out around my 7th or 8th birthday, and my mom took it back to the store because she knew it would give me nightmares. And I ended up seeing like the raptor chase scene through the kitchen at a friend's house maybe a couple months later. And I did indeed have nightmares after that. So for that reason, never saw any horror movies, wasn't a big horror movie fan. But, I was a big boy now. I'm in college. I can watch a scary movie.
Yeah.
Especially one about The Exorcist. And that movie left me shook at the end of it. I was not having had no previous experience with anything more scary than the Addams Family. I wasn't really prepared for what this movie was going to throw at us. And there was a senior who was watching the movie with us. He was in his 4th year of college seminary. And he saw that myself and a couple of the other newer students were pretty shook up about it. He said, "Hey, let's go to the chapel and say a rosary." And I said, "Yeah, that's a good idea. Let's do that." And so that was the last time I saw this movie before rewatching it for the show.
Goodness.
And so it has always occupied this interesting place in my mind because I came out of the movie very shook, but the scene that stuck with me the most that I would go back to throughout my time in seminary and over my last 10 years of priesthood is Regan kissing Father Dyer at the end of the movie. Just that pure, spontaneous act of gratitude coming from a place that she doesn't fully understand.
Yeah.
After you had that very intense close-up on the priest's collar. That had a big impact on me in that stage of my life because I was only a year or 2 years into my training for the priesthood. And in the Catholic world, there's a very clear message sent that in your early years, there's not an expectation you're going to see this all the way through. There's no institutional onus on the men entering in early years that they're going to become priests. There's a lot of language around discernment, around prayer, but making sure that you are open to what God wants you to do. That yes, the priesthood is a noble calling, but so too is marriage, so too is missionary work, so too are any number of things. So I was still praying through and seriously thinking about whether I wanted to give my life to the priesthood, to this life of service, to a life that was going to mean not getting married, not having a family, which were things that I had wanted when I was in high school until God showed up and said, "But is that really going to make you happy?" And I said, "Well, I hadn't really thought about it in those terms. I thought about just what I wanted." And to see that scene between Regan and Father Dyer, it had a big impact on me and presented this window into what a life of priesthood could mean, that I could have this positive influence on people simply by stepping into that office of priesthood, that because of what Father Karras and Father Marin did for Regan, she now has this affection for anyone who wears that collar. And that had a big impact on me and has continued to, in the back of my just imagination, just the way I think about myself when I put on the clerical collar and I present myself as a priest, that I'm not just representing myself, I'm representing every priest. And I'm offering an opportunity for any priest who comes after me to benefit from what I am able to do by giving witness to the presence of Jesus in this particular situation. So scared the pants off of me, but also informed my imagination of the priesthood. So a very rich artistic experience, I would say.
Oh, wow. Thank you for sharing that, Father David. I'm glad you brought that up, and I'm glad you decided to talk about the ending. A lot of people have opinions about the ending, but and we've talked about it on the show before. I really do believe that it is ultimately a movie about hope and redemption. A lot of people might think that it ends on a dark note, but I don't think so. And I'm excited to get to that part and kind of share my own thesis about that. But it makes me feel better that you also had a good feeling from it as well.
Right. It's really interesting. I mean, we've talked about the unofficial place that this movie has within modern Catholicism. And of course, the Catholic Church has tried to put out recommendations of movies that it officially supports. So in 1995, they were trying to put out this list of the movies that they had suggested. This was with the 100th anniversary of the invention of cinema. And so they broke up into three. And what the first part is religion specifically. And so it looks like Ben-Hur and the Gospel according to St. Matthew, the Pasolini version, and the Mission. And then the value section is Gandhi, maybe not Catholic specifically, but that uphold our views, right? Bicycle Thieves, Schindler's List. And then just art, and it picks Nosferatu, right? It's just an important artistic movie. But I think they still shy away, it seems, from The Exorcist. And it's so interesting to hear you're not the first Catholic we've heard be moved by The Exorcist. You're the first Catholic priest that we've heard officially saying that that's something that they've been interested in or that helped them with their faith. So yeah, it's interesting to me how it's sort of in the background of Catholicism since the 1970s, it seems.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, without further ado, let's jump right into this minute. We're so glad we got Father David for this one. So our minute begins with the breaking of a Holy Communion wafer.
And it ends with Karras saying, "But wouldn't that drive you out of Reagan?"
Wouldn't what drive who out of Reagan?
Or someone.
Or something. Or somewhere. Sometime.
Why is Reagan?
Why? Where is Georgetown? Well, no, we know where Georgetown is.
Yeah, right here.
That's actually yeah. But no, could this demon be excited for an exorcism, as today's title seems to imply? We'll have to wait and see. But for now, let's get back to the top of this minute. Speaking of Catholic things and Catholic traditions, we open up with a close-up of a priest's hands as they break a communion wafer in two. Our priest begins to speak. He broke the bread, gave it to his disciples, and said, and we realize it's Damien. And I realized it's been a long time since we have seen him, as he would say, in uniform. Kinnan, Father David, you remember the last time we saw him dressed as a priest.
Been a while. He's been in a lot of Georgetown wear, right? His Georgetown swag, but that identifies him as an athlete and a professor.
Right. He's dressed as like maybe a running coach.
Yeah, exactly.
And then just like as a normal civilian, right? So actually, the last time we saw him dressed as a priest was when he was saying mass for his mother. It was another brief shot of him in the chapel. He was doing mass. He was dressed in the white robes, and he was saying, "Remember thy servant Mary Karras." And we've seen him since then, of course, but that was the last time we saw him actually acting like a priest, and not just as a priest in the traditional black, but actually doing mass, which I think is really interesting. These two sort of like bookends we have. And if we go back a little bit further, we see that the last time he wears that traditional black is when he visits Bellevue, and he sees his mother for the last time. The Demi, why you do this to me? So,
and that poor woman ate his collar.
Yeah.
So did you catch that, Father David? That
I did.
Oh,
no,
you did.
Was,
okay, great.
Oh, sure.
Okay, so I guess I'm the only one who missed it.
Well, now to be fair, Lesser, I only caught it because I had listened to your episode of that minute before I rewatched the movie, so I was watching for that. But I was also clued into what Father Karras does with his collar, because sometimes he doesn't treat it the way a priest would, and other times he does. Like when he gets to his mother's apartment and he takes it off and puts it on the dresser, I just shook my head. It's like, it's unrealistic. Not a movie.
So you don't do that. You can't do that.
Well, you can. You can. But what a priest will do, they will, what I like to call park the car in the garage. They'll unbutton the top collar and then they'll put the tab onto one side of the collar. So you kind of got the white on one side and then it's just the open pocket on the other side. It's either that or you'll tuck it into the front pocket of the shirt. But to put it down on the dresser, that's not something a priest will do, because the priest will forget about it. Since I teach at the seminary, I can tell you how many times I have to motion a student over after morning mass and say, "You're not dressed." And he goes, "What?" And I point to his shirt, and he's not wearing his collar because he forgot to put it in. So a priest will always keep that little tab collar somewhere around the neck area, because you never know when you have to put yourself back on duty.
Right.
Wow. Oh man, that is so
that's why the woman was able to pull it out, because he had his collar popped and the tab just kind of hanging out off to the side there.
Yeah. Oh wow. Oh, that is so neat. Oh, thank you for sharing that, Father David.
Oh, you're welcome.
Okay.
It is interesting what you said though about how we have this connection with his mother and his clerical garb. Because, again, there's an element of priestly culture. There's a connection that priests often have with their mothers, because as a celibate man, my mother is the biggest feminine presence in my life. Right. And I honor her, and she takes a lot of delight in her priest son, as she takes a lot of delight in all of her children. Hi, Trevor. Hi, Elizabeth. But there's still always this special relationship between a priest and his mother. And for Karras to have these moments where after the death of his mother, his priestly garb goes away, I thought that was a really really good and subtle insight into his continuing vocational struggles with the death of his mother and this major support of his vocation, because he's an only child and his mother is a good pious woman. She would have encouraged his vocation. Now she's gone on, and he loses another anchor that secures his priestly identity.
Yeah.
In the book, we have this talk about Karras being on leave, effectively. But in the movie, we don't have that. So we just sort of have to see it visually and have him being removed, right? We don't get into a lot of the details about what is going on in his professional life.
Yeah. We do have some other people kind of like voicing, I think, his own inner fears and doubts. We have much later, we have the demon speaking in his mother's voice saying, like, if only you had been a doctor instead of a priest, I could have, lived in a nicer place, and, this is all your fault. But then, I mean, even before that, we have Uncle Tito. She's like, it's funny. Talking about,
you're not a doctor. You leave her all alone.
Yeah.
Thanks, Uncle Tito.
I know. Yeah. Right. But like, and that made me wonder. It's like, I don't know if we've ever talked about this on the show. Keenan, what do you think Mary Karras thinks of her son being a priest instead of we know what he fears, and we know what Uncle Tito says, and we know what the demon says. But like, what do we think like Mary Karras really feels about her son being a priest?
I think she really appreciates it and loves it the way that Father David's talking about. But at the same time, like, he's made this sacrifice of poverty that has now been bestowed upon her. I mean, I don't know if she puts that in those words, right? But she lives the way she does because she doesn't have anyone to take care of her, right?
Right. I've gone back and forth on this. Like, I think it's like, ultimately, I think she's proud of him. I think she's very proud.
The way she lights up when she sees him in her apartment, that is, there's no recrimination there, and the delight that she shows when she's at home and she's settled and she's in her space, I think reflects her pride in her priest son.
Right.
Yeah. I don't think she might not even associate. It's like, well, this is just me. This is just how I live and where I live, and it has nothing to do with Dimmy. And Dimmy is a wonderful, wonderful boy, and he's a wonderful priest. Yeah.
Right.
Oh, man. Okay. So actually, I want to read what it says here in the book for this scene, partly because I think it informs what I'm seeing here, and partly because I just think this is really good writing. Again, folks, this is the first edition, which I like better than the 40th anniversary one. He's reworded this scene, but I like the original better. So just bear with me with this. Okay. So here we go. A reading from the Book of Blatty. He returned to the Jesuit residence hall, found a cubicle, said Mass before the rush. As he lifted the host in consecration, it trembled in his fingers with a hope he dared not hope, that he fought with every particled fiber of his will. For this is my body, he whispered tremulously. No, bread. This is nothing but bread. He dared not love again and lose. That loss was too great, that pain too keen. He bowed his head and swallowed the host like lost illusion. For a moment, it stuck in the dryness of his throat. After Mass, he skipped breakfast, made notes for his lecture, met his class at the Georgetown University Medical School, threaded hoarsely through the ill-prepared talk. And in considering the symptoms of manic mood disorders, you will... Daddy, this is me. This is me. But who was me?
Yeesh.
Okay, yeesh. Yeah. So, Father David, you might know that after most of these readings... we respond with yeesh.
It's the only response.
Father Karras is going through it.
Yeah, he is. Yeah, but yeah, folks, we talked about projecting our own feelings, on like close-ups of actors' faces before. Perhaps because I'm more familiar with the book, I cannot help but see this dawning of tentative hope as he intones these words. How many times has he said these words? And when was the last time that they meant something? He's saying them now as if he's hearing them for the first time, or perhaps hearing them again after a long, long time. What do you guys think?
It's interesting you say, how often has he said these words? Because truthfully, it probably hasn't been all that much comparative to where Father Karras would be in a different era of the Catholic Church. So we're take to understand that the movie happens in the now of 1970 to 1973, somewhere in the early 1970s. For those who may not know, the early 1970s was a really interesting time in terms of the celebration of Mass in the Catholic Church, because the permission for the celebration of Mass in the vernacular had only recently been given. So if you consider Father Karras's career, he's gotten his, what does he say? He got his doctorate in psychiatry?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, some advanced degree.
Yes.
So he finished his theology studies, then went away for this further degree. So Father Karras was ordained maybe 6 years before this movie, maybe 5. It depends on how quickly he got that doctorate and when the Jesuits sent him away for that, which is probably pretty quick because Jesuits love a doctorate. But that means that Karras would have been ordained a priest right before this big shift from the Mass being all in Latin to the Mass being celebrated in the vernacular. So for Karras, these words would have an extra layer of alienness to them because this is not the Mass of his childhood. The Mass of his childhood would have been entirely in Latin. So if we go back to how his mother supported him and his connection there, here's another area in which Karras's priesthood is alienated from his past, because now, he's celebrating Mass in English, which he speaks all the time, but there's a strangeness, there's a newness to it that he's still coming to grips with. And when I talk to priests of Karras's generation, who would be now 50 years older than that, who came up through that time, the turnover, the change this represented is unimaginable to me, having come up during the time when the Mass was celebrated entirely in English. So I think, yes, there's the interior struggle, the dare not hope and put his belief in the Eucharistic mystery that's in front of him. But there's also the fact that the mystery is laid bare in a much more accessible way by the use of the vernacular. Imagine Blatty's writing where he's saying hoc est anum corpus meum. If he's saying those words in Latin, there's a better distance Karras would be able to keep from the mystery, because okay, it's Latin, blah, whatever. I can just rattle through the syllables. But now that it's English, he can't escape it. It's much more present to him. It's part of the same texture as the rest of his daily existence. And that presents the greater challenge to him as he's wrestling with his faith and wrestling with his vocation.
Oh, interesting.
That's really
I didn't
great.
even think of that, yeah.
Well, we were talking about previous minutes about the Vatican II reforms. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes. So the Second Vatican Council happened in the mid-1960s, and one of the reforms to come out of that was a desire for more use of the vernacular in the celebration of Mass, and in the reforms that happened, especially in the late 60s and very early 70s, that became the entire Mass celebrated in the vernacular. I'll now get off this liturgical history soapbox. This is not a Catholic
No, that's
podcast.
what our fans tell us, that whenever we cut ourselves off and say, this is not a class about pagan religion, they're like, no, please.
No, yeah. No.
That's
Our
fascinating.
listeners, I guarantee our listeners loved all of that. That's I certainly did.
Yeah,
wow.
I hadn't thought of that, even though we'd been talking about Vatican II just a couple minutes ago. So that's really interesting.
Yeah. Okay. So actually, I want to break this this scene down here. So our close up starts when he says, "Again, he gave you thanks and praise," and we can see that his eyes are looking up and out. And Father David, we talked about on the show before about how our main characters, especially Karras, get this look sometimes when they are looking at nothing. They are staring at it intensely as if it were something. And whenever Karras does it, it's like he is staring into the abyss, whether that be outward or into his own soul. His has always seemed to be a look of despair. And I bring that up because right now we caught him again looking at nothing, but this time I feel like he is seeing something. And so he continues, gave the cup to his disciples and said, "Take this, all of you, and drink from it." And you can see in his face and hear in his voice this tentative, fearful hope beginning to swell up. Like, watch his eyes, folks. At first, they're looking out and up. And as he continues to say the words, they go back down. And now he's looking inward again, feeling the words, perhaps hearing them, hearing his own voice say them, and perhaps hearing that word disciple and that meaning something. And his eyes continue to do this thing where like they go up and down and up and down and back up again, almost like he has to check, like, is this really happening? Oh my God, this is happening.
Yeah, one of the things that I was thinking about in watching this scene, first to your point, Lester, about how it's as if he's hearing these words for the first time. Because, take something that like we as Americans know pretty well, like the Pledge of Allegiance, and you can just rattle through that, and then you kind of stop and like, oh, liberty and justice for all. For all. Wait a minute. Hold on. And you hear that for the first time, and it catches your attention. And I can see the same thing happening with Father Karras, because it'll happen to me when I'm celebrating Mass. I've said those words, I can't tell you how many times, daily and twice on Sundays. And there will be times where I will likewise realize, oh, hey, I'm a priest and I'm saying the words that Jesus said at the Last Supper. And there's a promise that Jesus made that he would be present here in this host, in this chalice under the forms of bread and wine. And this is really weird. This is a strange thing that I'm doing. And this has to be true, because otherwise, what am I doing up here? And there's that kind of that moment of self-awareness that I can see in Karras. The other thing that I'm wondering about, given who Karras is demographically, how he was trained, he may have been trained in the Latin form of the Mass before his ordination, because there wouldn't have been any English texts to use to train him in. They would get too far in the minutia to speculate, but in the Latin form of the Mass in the mid 1960s, when the priest is speaking the words that introduce, say, the hoc est anum corpus meum, this is my body, in the run up to those words, the priest is directed to lift his eyes and look up. And so in Karras's liturgical training, before he says, this is my body, he would have been trained, or would have been expected to direct his eyes up. And that is still a specific rubric in one of the Eucharistic prayers that is celebrated in the church today. Whereas in the traditional Latin Mass form, there's one Eucharistic prayer that's said every single Mass. Now there are multiple different Eucharistic prayers that contain at their core the same institution narrative, the representation of the Last Supper, but have different prayers around that Eucharistic mystery. So for Karras, there's a looking up, because part of it is the Catholic ritual encouraging him to look at something. And here there's the beginning, perhaps, of what Karras is going to rediscover in his interactions with Father Marin, who is a very by-the-book priest, if you ever met one. Because Father Marin is convinced that if you follow on the rubrics of the church, if you follow through what the church lays out for an exorcism, and likewise, I'm sure, for Mass, there is going to be an encounter with the promises of God in doing so, that in that letting go of my own self and surrendering to something bigger than myself, I am put in a space of awe. I'm put in a space of mystery that can lead me to a truth I couldn't get to on my own.
Wow.
A lot of performers that I'll listen to, especially those who say grew up within the faith or any faith, or grew up in a small town where the only sort of performative experience they had was going to church or to temple, talk about seeing the priest or the rabbi, or certainly the cantors, as being their first role models for performance. So I hope that doesn't strike it as a sacrilegious or anything like that. But what do you think about that relationship of delivering these rituals as performance? We've tried to connect, say the question we get a lot on the show is like, why is Chris an actor for this movie? Why that of all the different professions we could have given her? And that's something I've been trying to explore recently of Karras as a again, not to belittle his faith or anything, but the function of him as a performer as well as Chris.
I think there's a lot there. I think there's a whole cinema studies paper in that question.
That's my job. That's my day job.
So I think there's a book there, Keenan. But just for the public performance aspect, there's been a lot of work, particularly recently, I'd say in the last 20, 30 years, in liturgical studies, and looking at the performance nature of ritual and how that is an essential aspect of liturgical prayer. Because when we think of performance in a 21st century context, we think of it as actors presenting characters that is not themselves. And even though it is always Tom Cruise in every movie that he's in, ostensibly he is playing a character, but there's this understanding that we're interacting with an artifice. And in that typical sense of performance, it's kind of a one-way street. In liturgical studies, there's an understanding of, yes, there is a performance quality, but it is a shared performance of both presider and participant in the pews, that together the congregation performs and enacts the liturgy. So in a Catholic understanding, to go back to, like we mentioned, the reforms of the Second Vatican Council, the bishops who wrote and met and deliberated during that council said that in the celebration of the liturgy, Christ is present in the Eucharistic elements, in the proclamation of Scripture, in the person of the presider, and in the person of the congregation, of the people themselves. And so there is a constant reference to the presence of Jesus, and the performance of the liturgy is what makes that presence manifest. Again, the Church understands that the Eucharistic liturgy is the source and summit of the Christian faith, that the Church is most itself when it is performing prayer, and not in a look at me performance kind of way, but in the way that you are most yourself when you are performing Keenan, when you're performing Lester. There's a certain freedom, a certain authenticity when you're being yourself. And performance is just the best word we have in the English language for that kind of thing.
Wow.
Well, to go and do some, ancient religious thoughts, you go into the history of that, right? So the first actor that we give credit to is Thespis, and that was part of a ritual performance as well for religious purposes. And the where we started to differentiate what he was doing as, what the performers in those rites were doing as religious people, and what Thespis was doing is that Thespis said, "I'm no longer myself; I am this character." So he would step forward and say, "I am Zeus, I am Bacchus, etc." So that was the separation, was the use of character in performance.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Interesting. Thank you, guys. So Karras says, "This is the cup of my blood." His brow furrows, again, like he's realizing the weight and the import of these words that he's been saying. And then we have our old friend, the J cut.
Yay.
J for jarring.
Now remind me the difference between the J cut and the L cut.
Oh, yes. Keenan, take it away.
So on our fancy dancy timelines that we have in our nonlinear editing software, so we have our cut, and if we have the sound from the previous shot from the cut bleeding into the next shot, it looks like a little L on our timeline. So that is a sound bridge where the sound continues on from the previous shot, or usually a previous scene, into the next one. And the J cut is the opposite, where we start to pre-lap the sound from the next scene before we actually see anything visually. We'll hear the train coming, or we'll hear someone screaming.
Right. And yeah, we've gotten a couple of J cuts and we've gotten a couple of L cuts in this movie already. And this one definitely, again, like J for jarring. And I was actually going to say, it is and it isn't at the same time. The voice we hear is so calm until we remember who it belongs to, and we see that face and we get that little jolt. There's another J word. Okay, and now before we get into the next scene, I think it's time for another reading. This is of the scene that we are about to see, where Damien goes to see Regan for a second time. A reading from the Book of Blatty. He moved to the staircase, climbed, saw Chris in the hall. She was sitting in a chair near Regan's bedroom, head lowered, her arms folded on her chest. As the Jesuit approached her, Chris heard the swishing of his robes. She glanced up and quickly stood. "Hello, Father." There were bluish sacs beneath her eyes. Karras frowned. "Did you sleep?" "Oh, a little." He was shaking his head in admonishment. "Well, I couldn't," she sighed at him, motioning her head at Regan's door. "She's been doing that all night. Any vomiting?" "No." She took hold of his sleeve, as if to lead him away. "Come on, let's go downstairs or we can—" "No, I'd like to see her," he gently interrupted. He resisted the tugging insistence of her lead. "Right now?" Something wrong, reflected Karras. She looked tense, afraid. "Why not now?" he inquired. She glanced furtively at the door of Regan's bedroom. From within shrieked the hoarse, mad voice, "Damned Nazi cunt!" Chris looked away, then reluctantly nodded. "Go ahead. Go on in." "You got a tape recorder?" Her eyes searched his with quick movements, little flicks. "Could you have it brought up to the room with a blank reel of tape, please?" She frowned with suspicion. "What for?" Then alarm. "You mean you want to tape?" "Yes, it's my father. I can't have you." "I need to make comparisons of patterns of speech," he cut in firmly. "Now please, you're just going to have to trust me." They turned to the door. as an excoriating stream of obscenities apparently drove Carl out of Reagan's room, his face ashen and grim. He was carrying soiled diapers and bedding. "Get him on, Carl?" Chris asked him as the servant closed the bedroom door behind him. Carl glanced quickly at Karras, then at Chris. "They are on," he said tersely, and went quickly down the hallway toward the staircase. Chris watched him. She turned back to Karras. "Okay," she said weakly. "Okay, I'll have it sent up." And abruptly, she was walking down the hall. For a moment, Karras watched her, puzzled. What was wrong? Then he noticed the sudden silence in the bedroom. It was brief. Now, the yelping of diabolic laughter. He moved forward, felt the water vial in his pocket. He opened the door and stepped into the bedroom. The stench was more powerful than the evening before. He closed the door, stared. That horror, that thing on the bed. As he approached, it was watching with mocking eyes, full of cunning, full of hate, full of power. "Hello, Karras." The priest heard the sound of diuretic voiding into plastic pans. He spoke calmly from the foot of the bed. "Hello, devil. And how are you feeling?" "At the moment, very happy to see you. Glad." The tongue lolled out of the mouth while the eyes appraised Karras with insolence. "Flying your colors, I see. Very good." Another rumbling. "You don't mind a bit of stink, do you, Karras?" "Not at all." "You're a liar." "Does that bother you?" "Mildly. But the devil likes liars." "Only good ones, dear Karras. Only good ones," it chuckled. "Moreover, who said I'm the devil?" "Didn't you?" "Oh, I might have. I might. I'm not well. You believed me?" "Of course." My apologies." "Are you saying that you aren't the devil?" "Just a poor, struggling demon. A devil. A subtle distinction, but one not entirely lost upon our Father who is in hell. Incidentally, you won't mention my slip of the tongue to him, Karras. Now will you? When you see him?" "See him? Is he here?" asked the priest. "In the pig? Not at all. Just a poor little family of wandering souls, my friend. You don't blame us for being here, do you? After all, we have no place to go. No home." "And how long are you planning to stay?" The head jerked up from the pillow, contorted in rage as it roared, "Until the piglet dies!" And then, as suddenly, Reagan settled back into a thick-lipped, drooling grin. "Incidentally, what an excellent day for an exorcism, Karras." The book. She must have read that in the book. The sardonic eyes were staring piercingly. "Do begin it soon. Very soon." Inconsistent. Something off here. "You would like that?" "Intensely." "But wouldn't that drive you out of Reagan?"
Yeesh.
Yeesh.
Yeah, you're getting there.
So, yeah, guys, what do we make of this this second meeting between Howdy and Karras? It's a little bit different from what we got in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Because the thing that caught my attention, was, given our talk about clerical fashion earlier in this episode, was how the devil specifically calls out that he's flying his colors, and you get that line about the swish of his robes earlier, which speaks to me of a Jesuit wearing his cassock, whereas the only time we see Karras wearing a cassock in the movie is not until the final exorcism itself. I think in the movie he's got his trench coat on.
Yes.
While he's in the room, and probably just the tab clerical shirt. But it is interesting that you have this call out to him wearing his priestly robes, and we had the scene prior to him celebrating Mass. So there's this, I don't know, sense of professional duty, I guess, that Karras has, that as a medical professional, I ought to wear the right uniform in order to present authority to the patient. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to wear the clerical collar. Because, as we'll talk about tomorrow, there are some shell games that Karras is trying to play here. So who knows how much he's actually buying into the spiritual authority that comes from that, or rather the spiritual authority he carries that's communicated and signaled by that clerical garb.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I'm so glad you brought that up. Yeah. Keenan, how about you?
Yeah, I think it's interesting how much forethought we have in the book, where we are seeing what Karras's plans are. Obviously, we're in his head. In the movie, we're going from this Eucharist directly into this scene without seeing any foreplanning. right?
Right.
So we're jumping right ahead, and then we're learning it essentially, even though the scene is from Karras' point of view and it's shot that way, we're learning some of his plans as the demon is learning them, right?
Right.
So, here's the tape recorder. We find that out when the demon finds it out, and then the holy water. So we'll get into his plan with the holy water in the book later, but we don't learn about the holy water until the demon learns about it.
Until much. Interesting. Yeah. And another thing, so this right here is one of the bigger changes from the book, where we have Howdy walking his initial claim back that he is the devil, right? And we talked before on the Napoleon Bonaparte episode about what that means here in this movie. Father David, I don't know if you heard us talk about the Laurie Strode argument. Listeners will remember. Yeah. Listeners will remember. It's where, like, if it's not in the finished film, then it doesn't exist, right? So if you take the first Halloween movie as a standalone film, right, Laurie Strode isn't Michael Myers' sister. If you only watch episode 4, Darth Vader isn't Luke's father, right? And
I
so
love the sentence, if you only watch episode 4.
Right, yes.
If you only watch the season finale of Lost.
If you only watch episode 4, the first one.
The first, the only one. Yeah.
Not titled episode 1 for some reason. I don't know. Yeah. But so here in this book, we have a scene with some dialogue that has been left out of the film. And that dialogue is key for anyone, and I include myself, who wants to say that this is not the devil.
Or not the devil, right?
Or not the devil, a devil, right? Father David, what do you think is going on here? Like, does Friedkin want us to see this as the devil?
I think, like I had mentioned before, Karras is playing some shell games in the upcoming minutes, and I think Friedkin is doing the same thing. Friedkin, he's a very good director. He knows what he's about. So he leaves enough ambiguity in the text of the film to keep you guessing. It was one of the shots I wasn't really thrilled about in the version you've never seen before, where in the exorcism scene, you have that extreme backlit shot of the Pazuzu statue and Reagan doing the weird contortions of like worship in front of it. It was like, that takes away some of the ambiguity here that I kind of like in the original theatrical cut of the movie. So I think Friedkin, it wants us to be in the same place as Karras. Like, is this Satan? Is this the big L himself? Or is this just a devil? From my own Catholic spiritual tradition, if we go to the exorcism ministry of Jesus, even Jesus doesn't directly encounter Satan and any of the people that he delivers from unclean spirits. They're always lesser demons or devils. You get Jesus talking about Satan. When his disciples come back from doing missionary work, Jesus says, I have seen Satan fall like lightning from the sky. But there's never a direct confrontation between them. Pache, the Passion of the Christ, and every other depiction of the Jesus story in film, because we just can't help it. It's just too good of an opportunity. Why not do it?
It's Batman and the Joker, right? It's,
exactly. You got it.
You want to know how I got these names? But here, I think we're just supposed to be in this space of ambiguity because there's, I think, as viewers, we know a little bit more than Karras. I think as viewers, we've seen the Ouija board mandala move on its own. We've seen some weird things where Father Karras hasn't seen. So we know, like, no, this is a real devil. There's like something actually happening. Karras is still like, is she just crazy? What's going on?
Right.
So I think that's what's happening in this particular scene. And while I think in the book, where you have kind of the longer form opportunity to explore kind of the ins and outs and the games that the devil is playing with Karras, because the devil is trying to squeezle around and present false facades and dead ends for Karras to run up into, so that he never quite figures out what's actually happening.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay, so let's get into this scene in the movie right here. Now, one thing I find particularly disturbing, like we said, is that we hear Captain Howdy before we see him. His voice is polluting the sanctity of this beautiful, hopeful church scene. And then here we realize what's going on. The picture changes again from something sacred to something blasphemous in more ways than one, because of course we got a demon here, but also this demon has corrupted and wasted the frame of this little girl. And that right there, we can see as almost blasphemous, taking something pure and innocent and visibly corrupting it. And so, here it is, folks. The famous line, Howdy says, "What an excellent day for an exorcism." And what do we make of that? Because, it can be seen a couple of ways. We could look at it like Howdy is showing off how much smarter he is than Karras. Yes, right. It's getting about time for that exorcism. I know what's coming. I'm 3 steps ahead of you. But then at the same time, Karras could take it as this is the part of my fantasy where the priest comes to exorcise me, and I'm just a sick little girl, delusional. Here we go, right? Which could further convince Karras that Regan is making it all up. What do you guys think?
Again, just this wonderful way that this cut works of, seeing the Catholic ritual and then having the demon praising Catholic ritual in some way, or inviting Catholic ritual in a way that really undercuts some of the beauty of the scene that you were talking about, of the both of you, right? Which again is a Friedkin sort of, it's a Friedkin special of maybe undercutting some of the niceness of the previous one, going because in the script it's, we have, no matter how you were to shoot it, we're at least cutting out this line where the demon says, "Hello, Karras," and we're jumping right to it. So, I think that is, kind of again cynical, making the taking this beauty thing that Blatty has and cutting into it a little bit.
The way I hear it is, again, and this is a thing I'm going to come back to again tomorrow. There's this play for control of the situation where Pazuzu and Karras are both kind of vying to be the one in charge of the situation. And the problem is that the Pazuzu is playing 4D chess while Karras is playing checkers, because Karras is not willing to entertain the possibility that this is actually a spiritual entity, which is a fallen angel and is smarter than I am. So Karras is getting played here because it's Pazuzu who is directing the course of the conversation here. Karras is always reacting to what's happening over the next couple of lines. And so what that does is that it allows Pazuzu to set the tone for the conversation. That by saying "what an excellent day for an exorcism," that puts Karras on the back foot. Why would this delusional little girl say that? And that makes Karras unsure, because either possibility, if this is an actual devil, it shouldn't want exorcism. And if this is a delusional little girl, again, she should want exorcism. So why is this person saying this?
Right.
There's a lot of mind games happening, both in this beginning of this scene that we have today and as it continues tomorrow.
Yeah, interesting. And so we cut to Karras, and it looks like he was in the middle of messing with something out of frame. We're going to see that in just a minute. Like you say, Father David, this line makes him stop and look up, and he's got this smile again, Karras and smiling. Folks, remember the happier times earlier in the movie where when Karras or Chris or Kinderman, when they smiled, it was like the sun coming out from behind a cloud and it felt good and it was genuine.
I don't remember that. No.
It's been so long ago. But now, in this half of the movie, when Karras smiles, they're more like grimaces. Right? He has the same stomach problem that Kinderman pretends to have, right? And Regan too. Remember when she used to smile in the beginning, compared to the smile that she's given us now? No, of course we don't.
No, thank you. Do not want.
No. But so Karras is a little incredulous here. He says, "You'd like that?" To which Captain Howdy replies, "Intensely." And this is also such a it's such an obscene response, because it's not because you're gonna lose, or it's not even like it'll be fun. It's like, I will relish it. I will enjoy it intensely. It'll feel good for him, and that makes me think of the actual exorcism later on, and we got Mercedes McCambridge making sounds where you can't tell if she's laughing or crying or both, right? And I've seen villains in movies where the big battle is about to start. Maybe the hero has already struck the first blow, and the villain takes the hit and then takes the slap or the punch, and rather than get angry, their face lights up, like, ooh, I'm going to enjoy this, right? Like, or even just like Heath Ledger's Joker laughing as Batman punches him in the face.
Yeah, never start the exorcism with a punch to the head, because it just makes everything fuzzy afterwards. Yeah, I think this is, again, part of Pazuzu's tactic to put Karras on the back foot, to present this as something that this delusional little girl / actual evil spirit is actually going to want. And I think it's in part because Karras is not spiritually prepared to do an exorcism. I think that's why Pazuzu wants him to try, because he has no authority from the church to do so. He has no personal faith. So on both of those levels, both the institutional and the personal, Karras does not have what he needs to actually bring spiritual power to bear to drive this devil out. And so Pazuzu, since the evil spirit can see spiritual realities like you and I see color, Pazuzu knows that he would have this in the bag if he can just entice this stupid secular priest to actually try to engage him on Pazuzu's home turf without any advantages that the church would offer him.
Yeah. I like this. It's exactly like you say. It's like it's 4D chess versus checkers. Right? Yeah. But yeah, so we cut, and now we can see more of the room, and we can also see what Karras was bending down to fiddle with. It's a tape recorder, and oh my God, that thing looks ancient. I realize this is not something the filmmakers predicted we'd be talking about, but every time I see a bit of technology in this movie, I cannot help but comment on it.
Yeah, but it's the kind. Yeah, Chris probably won it on her trip to the $25,000 pyramid, right?
Yeah,
it's a $2,500 tape recorder.
Yeah,
she was the first on her block to own one.
Yeah, right. No, it's the one before this took up a whole room. Yeah.
So this was actually Reagan's birthday present from last year.
There we go. That's what it is.
Right. So I did look it up, and Steve Jobs would be about Reagan's age, so he wouldn't be around to. We have to make it beautiful. It has to be beautiful as well as function beautifully. Jonathan Ivey isn't even born yet, I'm sure.
I love 70s technology aesthetic, right? Yes. That is to say, like, the lack of, right? Yeah. This thing looks like a mini stove with two burners, right? Like, what is this guy cooking up here? We'll have to wait until the next scene to find out. For now, that is all my notes. Keenan, Father David, is there anything else here?
That's all I've got.
That's it for me, too.
All right. Folks, this has been another excellent Exorcist Minute. I've been Lester Ryan Clark. You can reach me on all the socials as Lester Ryan Clark.
And I've been Keenan Diaz, and you can find me on Instagram and Letterboxd as Howdy Keenan.
And I'm Father David Mowry. You can find me on my website, fatherdavidmowry.com.
And we got our listener group, Compelling Conversations. Go check that out and request to join, and we'll let you in here with us. Thank you so much to everyone who has shared the show by word of mouth or on social media. And a big thank you to everyone who has given us a 5-star rating on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you listen to our show. We really appreciate that. It's going to help our little podcast grow and find more cool people like yourselves.
And again, we are part now of the TrueStory.fm network of wonderful podcasts. That's TRU-story.fm. And you could find a bunch of podcasts on many different subjects, including some movie-by-minute podcasts that have had Father David on their show.
Yes. So go check them out. That's TrueStory.fm. Okay, Keenan, Father David, are you guys thinking what I'm thinking?
I think I am, Lester.
I think I am, too.
Folks, until next time.
The power of the Joker compels you.